My heart almost jumped out of my chest. Just sharing the bed was already dangerous. Now there was this too. I kept telling myself it was just a storm. Just one night. Just a bed. But nothing about the way my body reacted to Alice Morgan felt simple anymore. The first time I realized something was wrong was when I heard the rain slam harder against the motel window. Not gentle rain. Not the soft Florida kind that comes and goes in 10 minutes. This sounded like the sky had cracked open. Wind pressed against the glass hard enough to make it shudder in its frame. The old neon sign outside the motel flickered red through the curtains, painting the room in brief pulses of color. Red. Dark. Red again. And there I was. In a cheap roadside motel room with my sister's best friend. Half-dressed. Trying very hard not to notice how close she was. Alice stood near the foot of the bed, wringing water from the hem of her shirt. Her hair, bright copper even in the dim motel light, was damp and clinging to the side of her neck. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. The room smelled faintly like wet denim, and the sharp citrus soap from the motel bathroom. Under that, something warmer. Something that felt dangerously like her. "You okay over there?" she asked. Her voice was casual, almost amused. Like none of this was strange. Like we hadn't just sprinted through wind and rain to reach the last available room in a motel that looked like it hadn't changed since the late 80s. "I'm fine," I said. Which wasn't exactly a lie. But it wasn't the truth either. Because the truth was this: my sister had warned me. Emma said it laughing when she handed me the ticket that afternoon. "Just don't fall for Alice." At the time I rolled my eyes. It felt like such a ridiculous idea. Alice Morgan was Emma's best friend. She'd been around for years. Barbecues. Movie nights. Random weekends when Emma's friends came over and took over the living room. She was always just Alice. Funny. Easygoing. The one who brought wine even when nobody asked. But tonight something had shifted. Maybe it was the concert. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the way she'd grabbed my hand in the crowd so we wouldn't get separated when the music got loud and people started pushing closer to the stage. Her hand had stayed there longer than it needed to. Warm, boy. Firm. Too comfortable. Too close. And now the storm had trapped us here. The motel room was small. The kind of place where every sound seemed louder than it should be. The hum of the air conditioner. The rain hammering the roof. The quiet rustle of fabric as Alice pulled her soaked shirt over her head and tossed it onto the chair beside the bed. I looked away instantly. Too fast. My pulse betrayed me anyway. I felt it in my throat, in my wrists, in the strange warmth crawling up my neck. "Your clothes are soaked too," Alice said. I glanced down at my jeans. She wasn't wrong. The denim clung to my skin, cold and heavy from the rain. The fabric had darkened 2 shades, damp along my thighs and calves. Sleeping in them would be miserable. I knew that. Still, I hesitated. Alice noticed. Of course she did. She noticed everything. "You don't have to be shy," she said with a small grin. "I promise I won't report you to Emma." Emma, that... There it was again. That line. That invisible boundary. I could almost hear my sister's voice echoing in my head. "Don't fall for her." I swallowed. "This is already weird enough," I muttered. Alice laughed softly. The sound carried through the room like warmth. "Anna," she said, "we're stuck in a motel during a storm that sounds like the apocalypse. Trust me, Awkward left the building a while ago." She had a point. Outside, the wind roared against the building like it wanted in. The window rattled again. A low roll of thunder followed. For a second the lights flickered. I exhaled slowly and pushed my damp hair away from my face. "Fine," I said. I turned slightly toward the bathroom door and peeled off the soaked shirt first, dropping it over the chair beside Alice's. Then the jeans. The cold air hit my legs immediately. I told myself not to look at her. I failed. Just for a second. Alice was standing near the bed in dark underwear and a thin tank top she'd pulled from her overnight bag. Her shoulders were bare. Her skin still glowed faintly warm from the run through the rain. She caught me looking. Not in an accusing way. Just a quiet awareness. And something about that small moment. The fact that she noticed and didn't say anything sent a strange shiver down my spine. Too close. That thought slipped through my mind before I could stop it. Too close. I climbed under the blanket quickly, pulling it over my waist. The mattress dipped slightly as Alice moved around the other side of the bed. One bed. Of course it was. I almost laughed earlier when the receptionist slid the key across the counter. Last room available. Alice had shrugged like it didn't matter. It's just a bed. I believed her then. Now I wasn't so sure. The bed creaked softly as she climbed in beside me. The blanket shifted. Warmth spread along the space between us. Not touching. Not yet. But close enough that I could feel the heat of her body through the thin air between our shoulders. The rain kept pounding the roof. Alice exhaled slowly. "That show was incredible," she said quietly. "Yeah." My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Too tight. Too careful. My body felt overly aware of everything. The brush of the sheets against my skin. The faint warmth of her arm a few inches away. The way the mattress moved every time she shifted. "You were right about that band," she added. "I told you, you did." Silence settled over the room again. Not uncomfortable, but heavy, like the air itself had thickened. I turned onto my side facing the window, trying to give us space, trying not to think about how close we actually were, trying very hard not to notice the slow rhythm of her breathing behind me. Too close. The phrase came back. I squeezed my eyes shut. Across campus back home, Jason was probably still texting me. He'd been calling earlier that evening before the concert started. I'd ignored it. Part of me already dreaded the conversation waiting for me when I got back. Jason never understood silence. To him, silence meant something was wrong. And he wasn't entirely wrong. Something was wrong. Just not the way he imagined. Behind me the bed shifted again. Then a quiet rustle of sheets. I felt it. Not a touch. Not quite. But close enough that the warmth along my back intensified. Alice had turned too. Now we were facing each other. The space between us suddenly felt smaller. I opened my eyes slowly. The room was dim except for the neon glow leaking through the curtains. Alice's face was only a few inches away. Her hair fell across her cheek in soft copper strands. Her eyes were open, watching me. My breath caught. "Trouble sleeping," she murmured. Her voice was softer now. Lower. Something in my chest tightened. "Yeah," I admitted quietly. Outside, thunder rolled again. The window trembled. For a moment, neither of us moved. The space between us seemed to hum with something invisible. Then Alice smiled slightly. Not teasing. Not exactly. Just knowing. "You know what your sister said earlier," she whispered. My stomach tightened instantly. "Emma, don't fall for me." The words hung between us. Heavy. Dangerous. I could have laughed it off. I could have rolled over and gone back to pretending this was just a strange night during a storm. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. Close enough to feel her breath. Close enough to notice the way her eyes flicked briefly to my lips before returning to my gaze. Too close. The thought returned again. But this time it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like gravity. And for the first time since the storm began, I realized something that made my pulse jump harder than the thunder outside. The storm wasn't the dangerous part of this night. She was. And the worst part? A small, reckless part of me wasn't trying very hard to stop it. I didn't move. Not right away. For a few seconds, maybe longer, the world shrank to the small pocket of space between Alice and me. The storm kept raging outside the motel, wind pressing against the building like a living thing. Somewhere down the hallway, a door slammed, followed by muffled footsteps and the distant hum of a television. Life continuing. People existing. But inside our room, the air felt different. Thicker. Warmer. Alice was still watching me. Not intensely. Not aggressively. Just aware. And that awareness made my pulse pick up in a way I couldn't control. Too close. The thought came back again, quieter this time. Less like a warning, more like a recognition. "Anna," she said softly. My name in her voice felt different tonight. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the closeness. Maybe it was the way the dim motel light traced the edge of her cheekbone and turned her hair into a halo of copper shadows. Yeah? Her lips curved slightly. You look like you're thinking about something dangerous. I let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. That obvious? A little. I hesitated. The easy answer would have been a joke. Something casual to break the tension. But my mind kept replaying the moment earlier in the car. Her hand in mine at the concert. The warmth of her fingers threading between mine and the crowd. How natural it had felt. How long it had lasted. And how neither of us had rushed to pull away. You're Emma's best friend, I said finally. The words came out slower than I expected. Alice blinked once. That's true, that makes this weird. She tilted her head slightly. Weird how? I searched for the right explanation. Or maybe the safest one. I've known you for years, I said. You've always been around. Barbecues, movie nights, random Sundays when Emma dragged everyone over. Guilty. But tonight feels different. The room went quiet again. The storm rattled the window harder for a moment, rain streaking across the glass like moving shadows. Alice didn't answer immediately. She studied my face the way someone might study a puzzle. Then she said quietly, Different how? I swallowed. The truth hovered dangerously close to the surface. Too close. I don't know, I said. Not exactly a lie, but not exactly honest either. Her gaze didn't leave mine. The mattress shifted slightly as she adjusted her arm under the pillow. The movement brought her a fraction closer. Not enough to touch. Just enough that I noticed. My body noticed. My pulse picked up again, quick and sharp under my ribs. You've changed, she said. The comment caught me off guard. What? Alice shrugged faintly. You're not the same girl I remember. What girl do you remember? The quiet one, she said. The one who stayed in the corner during Emma's parties and pretended she wasn't listening to everyone's conversations. I snorted softly. That was years ago, I know. Another pause. Then she added almost thoughtfully, But tonight you were different. How? Her eyes flicked over my face, lingering just long enough to make my skin warm. You look like you're trying very hard not to do something. Heat spread up my neck immediately. That's ridiculous, is it? Her voice stayed calm. Curious. And somehow that made it worse. Because she wasn't teasing me. She was observing. And the worst part was that she wasn't entirely wrong. I shifted under the blanket, suddenly aware of the narrow distance between us again. My knee brushed the mattress where her leg rested on the other side. Close. Too close. I cleared my throat. You're imagining things. Alice didn't respond. Instead, she leaned back slightly against the pillow, eyes still on me. Faint neon glow from outside flashed through the curtains again, briefly illuminating the room in red. For a split second, her expression softened into something unreadable. Then the light faded. You know, she said slowly, Emma talks about you all the time. My stomach tightened. That's terrifying. Alice laughed quietly. Relax. It's usually good things, usually. She worries about you. That surprised me. Why? Alice hesitated. Then she said, Because of guys like Jason. My breath stalled for half a second. Of course she knew. Emma told her everything. What did Emma say? I asked carefully. Alice exhaled slowly. That he doesn't listen when you say no. My jaw tightened. That's not exactly true, she finished gently. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was complicated. Jason wasn't violent. He wasn't cruel. But he was persistent in a way that made my chest feel tight every time my phone buzzed. He didn't understand distance. Or silence. Or boundaries. You deserve someone who actually listens to you, Alice said quietly. The words landed deeper than I expected. For a moment I couldn't think of anything to say. The storm outside softened slightly, the rain turning from pounding sheets to a steadier rhythm against the roof. My phone buzzed faintly on the nightstand. Once. Twice. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Alice glanced toward the sound. Jason? I nodded. Probably. You're not going to answer. No? Why not? I stared at the ceiling for a moment. Because answering would mean explaining where I was, who I was with, and something about that suddenly felt complicated. I'll deal with it tomorrow, I said. Alice studied me again. Then she reached over the edge of the bed and picked up my phone from the nightstand. Before I could protest, she flipped it face down and set it back down. There, she said. What was that for? So you stopped thinking about it? That's not how phones work. She shrugged. Worth a try. A reluctant smile pulled at the corner of my mouth. Your trouble. Emma says that too. Another flash of neon lit the room, and in that brief glow I noticed something I hadn't before. Alice wasn't looking at my face anymore. Her gaze had drifted slightly lower. Not in an obvious way, just enough that I noticed. My breath hitched almost imperceptibly. She realized I had seen it. And for the first time since we'd gotten into the bed, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her expression. Not fear, just awareness. The same awareness that had been building between us all night. Neither of us spoke, but the silence felt louder than any conversation. Too close. The phrase returned again. Only this time it came with a different realization. It wasn't just me feeling it. Alice shifted slightly under the blanket. Her knee brushed mine. The contact was brief. Barely a second. But my body reacted instantly. Heat. Pulse. That strange electric awareness running along my skin. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. Instead, she said quietly, almost like she was thinking out loud, "You know what the dangerous part about storms is?" My voice came out softer than I intended. What? They make people do things they normally wouldn't. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The storm wasn't gone. Just moving farther down the coast. Still close enough to hear. I met her gaze again. What kind of things? I asked. Alice held my eyes for a long moment. Then she said simply, honest things. Something inside my chest tightened at that. Because honesty in this moment felt more dangerous than the storm outside. My knee shifted again slightly against the mattress. This time the contact between our legs lasted a fraction longer. Neither of us acknowledged it. Neither of us moved away. The outside world kept going. Rain softened. Cars passed occasionally on the highway beyond the motel parking lot. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed loudly before a door shut again. Life continuing. But inside the room something had changed. Not dramatically. Not visibly. Just enough that the space between Alice and me no longer felt neutral. It felt charged. Unstable. And the longer we stayed there facing each other in the dim red glow of the neon light, the harder it became to pretend we didn't both feel it. I kept telling myself the storm was the reason the air felt like this. Heavy. Warm. Unsteady. But the truth was sitting right in front of me. Alice Morgan. Still only a few inches away. Still watching me like she was trying to read something written between my breaths. The rain outside had softened, but the wind still circled the motel building in long restless gusts. The neon sign outside flickered again, spilling a faint red glow across the room before fading back to dim amber. Alice shifted slightly on the pillow. Not away. Just enough that her face came a little closer to mine. My body reacted before my mind caught up. My pulse jumped. A quick, sharp thud beneath my ribs. I hated that she probably noticed. She noticed everything. "You're thinking again," she murmured. Her voice was quiet, almost amused. "Am I?" "Yes." I tried to sound casual. "What makes you so sure?" Alice's mouth tilted slightly. "Because every time you think too hard, you hold your breath." I blinked. "What? You're doing it right now." I exhaled immediately, half laughing under my breath. "That's not a thing. It is when you do it." Something about the way she said that made warmth creep up my neck again. This was ridiculous. She was Emma's best friend. She'd known me since I was barely out of high school. And yet tonight everything felt tilted. The mattress shifted slightly as she adjusted her arm. The movement sent a ripple through the bed. My leg brushed against hers. Just barely. A small point of warmth through the thin blanket. Neither of us moved away. The contact stayed there. Light died. Accidental. but my body reacted instantly. Heat spreading slowly through my stomach, pulse climbing again. Too close. The phrase echoed quietly in my mind, but it didn't sound like a warning anymore. Alice noticed the contact too. Her gaze flicked down briefly toward the blanket between us, then back to my eyes. Something in her expression changed. Not dramatic. Just a soft awareness settling into place. "You know," she said quietly, "Emma always said you were the responsible one." I huffed softly. "That's a dangerous assumption." She meant it as a compliment. "I know." Alice studied me for a moment. "But right now," she continued slowly, "you don't look very responsible." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her gaze drifted again, quick, subtle, before returning to my face. "You look like someone who's about to make a bad decision." The words should have made me laugh. Instead, they landed somewhere deeper. Because the worst part was that she wasn't entirely wrong. I swallowed slowly. "Maybe you're imagining things again, maybe." But her voice didn't sound convinced. The storm rolled faintly in the distance now. Thunder softer but still present. Like a reminder that it hadn't fully passed. My phone buzzed again on the nightstand. A sharp vibration against the wood. Once. Twice. Jason. Of course it was Jason. Alice's eyes flicked toward the sound. Then back to me. "You should probably answer that. I'll deal with it tomorrow. You said that earlier. I meant it." Another buzz. Louder this time in the quiet room. Alice watched me carefully. "Does he always do that?" "What? Keep trying until you respond?" I hesitated. Then nodded once. "Yeah." Silence stretched between us again. This time it felt heavier. Alice's brow furrowed slightly. "He doesn't listen when you say no, does he?" Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. "No," I admitted quietly. Another pause. Then she said something that made my heart stumble. "You should be with someone who does." Her voice wasn't teasing anymore. It was steady. Certain. And for a second I forgot how to breathe. Because suddenly the distance between us felt impossibly small. Too close. My pulse hammered harder. I became painfully aware of everything again. Her breathing. The warmth of her leg against mine. The faint scent of citrus soap and rain still clinging to her skin. Alice's gaze dropped briefly to my mouth. Then rose again. The shift was small. But it changed something. The air between us tightened. Like the moment before lightning strikes. My body reacted before my thoughts could catch up. A slow, involuntary inhale. My chest rising. My heart beating faster. She noticed. Of course she did. For a long second neither of us spoke. And then Alice said very quietly, "You know, this is a terrible idea." The words should have broken the tension. Instead they deepened it. "Yeah," I whispered. My voice barely made it past my lips. Another long moment passed. And then something inside me fractured. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet shift deep in my chest. Because suddenly I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself before. I wasn't just reacting to the situation. To the storm. To the alcohol from the concert. I wanted this moment. Wanted the closeness. Wanted the heat creeping through my body every time she looked at me like that. And that realization changed something. Because if I wanted it, then the danger wasn't accidental anymore. It was a choice. Emma's voice echoed faintly in my memory. "Don't fall for her." Too late. Alice moved slightly closer. Just enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath against my lips. My pulse exploded. Every nerve in my body seemed to wake up at once. I should move. I should roll over. I should put distance between us before this turned into something neither of us could undo. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. Close enough to see the tiny flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Close enough to feel her hesitation. Close enough to know she felt the same gravity pulling us toward the same point. And somewhere deep inside my chest a quiet question surfaced. Was I about to ruin everything for one touch? Alice inhaled slowly. Then she closed the final inch between us. The kiss wasn't rushed. Or dramatic. Just warm. Careful. Like both of us were testing something fragile. My brain went completely blank. My body reacted before I could think. Heat spreading through my chest. Pulse racing. My hand gripping the blanket instinctively. For a moment the entire world shrank to that single point of contact. Her lips. Mine. Soft. Uncertain. Electric. Then she pulled back. Just slightly. Not far enough to break the closeness. Her forehead rested lightly against mine. Neither of us spoke. But something had shifted. Irreversibly. I felt it in the way my chest rose and fell. In the way my thoughts refused to settle back into their old shape. Because I knew something now that I couldn't unknow. I wanted her. Not in the abstract. Not in the safe hypothetical way I'd been pretending all night. But here. Now. And that realization made everything suddenly more complicated. Jason. Emma. Madison. All the invisible lines we had just stepped over. Alice exhaled softly. You see? She murmured. Her voice was barely more than breath. What? Her lips curved faintly. I told you storms make people honest. My heart was still racing. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure I regretted it. Outside, the rain finally began to fade into the distance. But inside that small motel room, lying inches away from my sister's best friend, I knew the real storm had only just started. Her lips were still close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath. The kiss had ended. But nothing about the moment felt finished. Neither of us had moved away. Her forehead still rested lightly against mine, our noses almost brushing every time either of us inhaled too deeply. The motel room had gone quieter now that the worst of the storm had rolled down the coast. Only a softer rain remained, tapping against the window in irregular patterns, and the distant hum of cars passing on the highway somewhere beyond the parking lot. The neon sign outside flickered again, bleeding faint red light through the curtains. Red. Then darkness. Then red again. My heart still hadn't slowed down. Each beat felt heavy in my chest, like my body hadn't quite realized the kiss had stopped. Alice exhaled slowly. Her breath brushed against my lips. For a second neither of us spoke. The silence felt fragile, like one wrong movement could snap it. Then she murmured quietly, almost to herself, "Okay." The word hung there. Soft. Uncertain. Her hand moved slightly against the pillow between us, fingers flexing as if she didn't quite know where to put them. "We should probably stop," she added. The sentence sounded responsible. Reasonable. But the way she said it, soft, breath uneven, forehead still resting against mine, made it feel less like a decision and more like something she was reminding herself to believe. "Yeah," I whispered. The agreement came out automatically. But neither of us moved. Not an inch. My body stayed exactly where it was. Close enough to feel the warmth of her skin. Close enough to notice the slow rhythm of her breathing. Close enough that every tiny movement between us felt amplified. Too close. The thought flickered again through my mind. Except now it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a fact. Alice shifted slightly, her cheek brushing the pillow as she pulled back just enough to look at me properly. Her eyes searched my face. Careful. Curious. Almost cautious. Like she was waiting for me to laugh and say we'd both just imagined the whole thing. I didn't. Instead, I kept looking at her. Really looking. At the faint scatter of freckles across the bridge of her nose. At the way the dim light caught in the copper strands of her hair. At the tiny crease forming between her brows as she tried to read my expression. "You're thinking again," she said softly. I huffed out a quiet breath. "Probably. That's dangerous." "Why?" Her mouth tilted slightly. "Because people who think too much tend to stop themselves." My chest tightened a little. "And that's bad. Sometimes." The rain softened again outside. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Alice said something that shifted the air between us. "Tell me something honestly. Okay?" Her voice dropped slightly. "Was that just the storm?" The question landed gently, but it carried weight. Was it the storm? The concert? The alcohol? The motel room? The fact that we'd been stuck together all night with nowhere else to go? All easy explanations. All safe. But the truth rising quietly in my chest didn't feel that simple. I swallowed. No. Alice blinked once. My voice came out quieter the second time. No. It wasn't. Her eyes didn't leave mine. The air between us changed again. Subtle, but undeniable. Then what was it? She asked. I hesitated. Because saying it out loud meant acknowledging something I had been carefully avoiding all evening. Emma's voice echoed faintly in my memory. Don't fall for her. Too late. I think. I started. My throat tightened slightly. I've been trying not to notice you for a while. Alice's breath caught. Anna, I stopped myself. Then started again. No, that's not right. Her eyes narrowed slightly with interest. Not right how? I exhaled slowly. I noticed you. The words felt heavier than I expected. I just pretended it didn't mean anything. The room went completely still. Alice stared at me for a second longer than before. Then something in her expression softened. A quiet understanding settling in. Emma told me once you overthink everything, she said gently. That sounds like Emma. She said you'd rather ignore something complicated than deal with it. That also sounds like Emma. Alice's hand shifted slightly under the blanket. Slow. Careful. Until her fingers brushed lightly against my wrist. My breath hitched instantly. The contact was soft. Barely there. But it sent warmth racing up my arm. Her thumb rested lightly against the inside of my wrist. Right over the quick pulse beating there. She felt it. Her eyes flicked down briefly. Then, back up. You're nervous, she said quietly. My pulse only sped up more. Maybe. Why? The question sounded almost curious. Not accusing. I looked at her. Really looked. You're my sister's best friend. Alice nodded slightly. That's true. You've known me for years. Also true. And Emma specifically told me not to fall for you. Her lips curved faintly. That sounds like Emma. My voice dropped a little. And I think she might have known something I didn't. Alice didn't respond immediately. Her thumb traced a small circle over my pulse. Gentle. Unhurried. Maybe she did, she said quietly. My stomach tightened. The air between us felt warmer now. More fragile. Anna, she murmured. Yeah? Her gaze dropped briefly to my mouth again. Then returned to my eyes. Do you want me to stop? The question landed softly. But it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Because suddenly the choice wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't about storms or accidents or timing. It was about what I wanted. My chest rose slowly as I inhaled. Jason's name flickered briefly through my mind. Emma, Madison? All the people and expectations waiting outside the small motel room. But none of them were here right now. Right now there was just this moment. This bed. This warmth. And the quiet gravity pulling us closer. I shook my head slightly. No. The wout softer than I expected. Alice studied my face for another second. Making sure. Then she leaned forward again. The second kiss felt different. Slower. Warmer. Certain. My body responded instantly. My hand slid instinctively to her shoulder, fingers curling lightly against the soft fabric of her tank top as the space between us disappeared again. This time neither of us hesitated. The world outside the motel faded. The rain. The distant highway. The faint glow of neon behind the curtains. Everything blurred into background noise. Alice pulled me closer across the mattress. The blanket shifted around us as our legs tangled slightly beneath it. My pulse thundered in my ears. Heat spread slowly through my chest and down my arms. The moment stretched. Not rushed. Not frantic. Just a quiet surrender to something that had been building all night. At some point we both paused again, breathing heavier now. Alice's forehead rested lightly against mine once more. Her hand still wrapped gently around my wrist. This changes things, she whispered. I nodded slightly. I know. Emma's going to kill me. She might. And Jason. I'll deal with Jason. Her eyes searched mine again. You're sure? I didn't answer right away. because the truth was complicated. But one thing suddenly felt very clear. If I pulled away now, if I pretended this moment hadn't happened, I would regret it. So instead I leaned forward again, closing the distance, answering the question without words. Alice exhaled softly. Then her arms slid around me, drawing me closer into the warmth beneath the blanket. The rest of the night unfolded slowly after that. Not reckless, not rushed. Just a quiet gravity pulling us closer and closer until there wasn't any space left between us. Time blurred. Minutes stretching into something softer, warmer. Eventually, the storm outside faded completely, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of cars moving along the highway. Later, much later, I found myself lying with my head resting against her shoulder, Alice's arm draped loosely across my waist, our breathing slowly settling into the same rhythm. Sleep hovered somewhere close, but my mind stayed awake a little longer, because something inside me had shifted tonight, something I couldn't undo. And lying there in the quiet warmth beside my sister's best friend, I realized something that made my chest tighten again. This hadn't felt like a mistake. It had felt like the beginning. When I opened my eyes, the room looked softer than it had in the dark. The storm was gone. Not completely gone. Nothing in Florida ever really feels gone after a night like that. The window still held faint streaks of rain, and the parking lot outside looked washed clean in the pale gold light of late morning. But the violence of it had passed. The wind had quieted. The neon sign outside was off now. The world looked ordinary again. That was the first strange thing. The second was that I was still wrapped in Alice. Her arm was draped loosely across my waist. My cheek rested against the warm curve of her shoulder. One of my legs was tangled with hers beneath the blanket, and for a few quiet seconds before my mind fully caught up, I stayed there and let myself feel it. The warmth, the weight of her beside me, the soft rise and fall of her breathing, the kind of stillness that only exists after something irreversible. My heart didn't jump this time. It didn't pound the way it had in the middle of the night, when everything between us felt uncertain and dangerous and new. Now it ached differently, deeper, because there was no pretending left. I knew exactly where I was, exactly who she was, exactly what had happened. And the truth sat in my chest with a strange, quiet clarity. This hadn't been a mistake. I shifted slightly, careful not to wake her, but Alice stirred anyway. Her hand tightened very softly at my waist before loosening again, like her body had recognized mine before she was fully awake. Then she inhaled, slow and deep, and I felt the moment she came back into herself. Her fingers moved first, a small, lazy brush across my side. Then her voice, low with sleep. "What time is it?" I lifted my head enough to squint toward the nightstand. The cheap motel clock looked too bright in the daylight. Almost 11:30. Alice gave a quiet, disbelieving laugh against my hair. "We slept that long?" I think we were both exhausted, or avoiding reality. That made me smile, but only for a second, because reality was already waiting. I could feel it before I even reached for my phone. The room still held the warmth of the night, but daylight had a way of sharpening things. Questions. Consequences. The shape of what came next. I pushed myself up slowly, the blanket slipping lower as I reached toward the nightstand. My phone was face down where Alice had left it hours earlier. The screen lit up the second I touched it. 8 missed calls. 12 texts. Most of them from Jason. A few from Emma. And one from an unknown number that I somehow already knew wouldn't stay harmless for long. I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. Alice had pushed herself up beside me now, the sheet gathered loosely around her. Her hair was a little messy from sleep, copper waves falling over one shoulder. There was a mark near her collarbone that made my chest tighten for an entirely different reason, and I had to look away before she noticed what I was seeing. "What is it?" she asked quietly. I swallowed once and unlocked the phone. Jason's messages hit me first. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Emma said you went to a concert. Who are you with? Anna, I'm serious. This is getting ridiculous. Call me back." Then the most recent one. "Don't ignore me." The words sat there on the screen with that same familiar pressure they always carried, and something inside me that had always softened for him suddenly didn't. Maybe it was the room. Maybe it was Alice beside me. Maybe it was waking up and realizing I was tired of feeling cornered by someone I had never even truly chosen. Alice didn't ask to read the messages. She just watched my face. "Jason?" she asked. I nodded. "What did Emma say?" I clicked to her text next. "Need you to text me when you can. Please tell me you two are okay. Storm warning got worse overnight. Also, if Alice is driving, tell her not to be a hero." And then from almost an hour earlier, "You're alive, right?" I let out a small breath that almost turned into a laugh. Alice glanced at me. "That doesn't look like disaster. It's Emma," I said. "Disaster comes with more caps lock." That got a faint smile out of her. But the smile didn't stay long, because there was still that unknown number. No message. Just a missed call. I turned the phone over in my hand. Alice's expression changed before I said anything. "Madison?" I asked quietly. She went still. Not dramatically. Just enough. Then she looked down for a second and nodded once. My chest tightened with a slow, unfamiliar kind of discomfort. So that was it. Not abstract anymore. Not some name from the edges of the story. Not an old relationship that stayed neatly in the past. A real person. A real complication. I set the phone back on the nightstand more carefully than I needed to. The room had changed. Not because of anything loud. Nothing had happened except a screen lighting up in daylight. But suddenly, the motel felt smaller than it had an hour earlier. Alice tucked one knee beneath the sheet and looked at me. "I should have told you more about her." The words came out calm, but I could hear the strain underneath. "What is there to tell?" She exhaled slowly. "That we were together for almost a year. That it ended a few months ago. That she took the ending badly." "Badly how?" Alice leaned back against the headboard and dragged a hand through her hair. "She doesn't think it's over." I looked at her. Really looked. And there it was. Not fear exactly. More like fatigue. The kind that comes from having the same emotional mess return over and over again, wearing a different face. "She still calls?" I asked. "Sometimes. Shows up?" Alice hesitated. "Yes." The answer landed quietly, but it carried weight. I nodded once even though my throat had gone a little tight. Not because I was angry. I wasn't. She hadn't lied to me. Not really. But the world outside this room was beginning to reassemble itself, piece by piece, and every piece came with a cost. Jason. Madison. Emma. The night had felt like its own universe. Morning was less forgiving. Alice studied my face carefully. "Say whatever you're thinking." I looked down at my hands for a second, then back at her. "I'm thinking that this got real very fast." Her mouth curved, but not into a smile. "Yeah." I pulled the blanket a little higher around myself, suddenly aware of the cool air in the room, the daylight, the fact that our clothes were draped over a chair, as if the night had left evidence everywhere. "Do you regret it?" I asked. The question came out more quietly than I expected. Alice's answer didn't. "No." Not rushed. Not defensive. Just immediate. Something in my chest eased, even though the tightness didn't disappear completely. She held my gaze. "Do you?" I could have lied then. Could have said I didn't know yet. Could have used Jason or Emma or the storm or the morning after as a shield. But I was tired of pretending. Maybe that was the real thing the storm had taken from me. The ability to stand inside my own life and act like my body, my heart, my instincts weren't trying to tell me something. "No," I said. Alice watched me for one more second, then nodded once, as if she'd been braced for impact and had found something steadier instead. Outside, a truck rolled slowly through the parking lot. Somewhere nearby, a door shut. The world kept moving. Inside the room, I looked at her and realized that what had changed wasn't just what had happened between us. It was me. I had spent so much time managing everyone else's expectations that I'd started mistaking that for my own voice. Jason expected access. Emma expected honesty. The entire shape of my life had been built around not disappointing people, not causing problems, not being difficult. And then one stormy night with Alice had split something open. Not because she saved me, Not because she rescued me from some smaller version of myself, but because I had said yes and meant it. Because for one night, I had chosen desire without apologizing for it. And that truth was more frightening than the kiss had been. My phone buzzed again. Jason. The name flashed across the screen with all the persistence I'd spent months excusing. Alice looked at it, then at me. I reached for the phone. "Are you going to answer?" she asked. I looked at the screen for a long second. Then I silenced it. No. Tiny shift. That was all. But it felt bigger than most of the choices I'd made in weeks. Alice's eyes stayed on me. "You don't owe him more than the truth," she said quietly. I know. The thing was, I did know. I just hadn't been living like I knew. I got out of bed before I could sit there thinking myself in circles again. The carpet was rough under my feet. The motel mirror above the dresser was slightly crooked, reflecting a version of me that looked more honest than I felt ready for. My hair was a mess. My mouth still held the memory of her. There was a softness around my eyes I didn't recognize at first because I was used to looking tense. Alice stood a second later, gathering the sheet around herself with one hand, and the sight of her in plain daylight nearly stopped me. Night had made everything feel cinematic. Morning made it real. The line of her shoulder. The sleep-heavy calm in her expression. The fact that she was standing in the same room as me, not as Emma's best friend in the abstract, not as some dangerous possibility, but as the woman I had spent the night with, and would have to keep choosing or not choosing from this moment on. My pulse stirred again. Not frantic. Not confused. Just warm. Too close, I thought. And then I surprised myself because the phrase didn't hurt the way it had before. Too close had once meant danger. Now it felt like truth. We got dressed in the quiet, trading the occasional look that lasted too long. There was something almost unbearably intimate about ordinary movements after a night like that. Pulling on damp jeans that had mostly dried. Running fingers through tangled hair. Passing each other in the narrow space between the bed and the bathroom door, and feeling the awareness rise all over again. At one point our hands brushed near the sink. Only that. Nothing dramatic. But I felt it all the way up my arm. Alice noticed my reaction and looked at me in the mirror. "You okay?" I gave a tiny laugh under my breath. Not even a little. That made her smile for real. "Good," she said softly. "Good, yes." She stepped closer, just enough that I could see her properly in the mirror behind me. Because I'm not exactly calm either. I turned toward her. The bathroom light was too harsh, too ordinary for a moment like that. And maybe that was why it felt so real when she leaned in and kissed me once, brief and warm and completely unhidden by darkness or storm or alcohol. Just morning. Just us. When she pulled back, she touched my wrist with 2 fingers, right over my pulse, and something about the familiarity of it made my chest pull tight. "We should check out before they charge us for another night," she murmured. I smiled despite myself. Probably. The drive back felt different from the drive out. The sky was clear now, painfully blue. Water still shimmered on the road in low places, and the trees looked rinsed clean, every green edge brighter than before. Alice drove with one hand on the wheel, and the other resting near the console, close enough to mine that I noticed every inch between us. We didn't fill the silence just to fill it. Sometimes that kind of quiet means distance. This didn't. This quiet was full. At a red light, my phone buzzed again. Jason. Then immediately after, Emma. I answered Emma. "Alive," she said the second the call connected. I laughed before I could stop myself. "Barely, thank God." I was 2 seconds from calling the governor. Alice glanced over at me, smiling slightly at the sound of Emma's voice through the car speakers. "We got a motel," I said. "The storm got too bad." I figured. Emma's tone shifted just slightly, enough that I noticed. "You two okay?" My heart kicked once hard. Alice kept her eyes on the road. "Yeah," I said, and then because the word felt too small, I added, "We're okay." Emma was quiet for 1 beat too long. Then she said, too casually, "Good. Come by later." There was something deliberate in the invitation. Something waiting. "Sure," I said. "Great. Also, Anna, yeah? Don't dodge me." The line went dead before I could answer. I stared at the screen for a second. Alice was still looking at the road, but I could tell from the shape of her mouth that she'd heard enough. She knows, I said. She definitely suspects. I leaned my head back against the seat. Maybe she always did. Alice said nothing to that, which somehow felt like an answer. Jason called 3 more times before we reached town. 4th time, I answered. I had to. Not because he deserved access, but because I was done letting his persistence decide the shape of my day. Anna, he said immediately. No hello. No softness. Just pressure. Where have you been? Out. With who? The question came so fast it almost made me laugh. That's not your business. Silence. Then a sharp breath on the other end. Are you serious right now? Yes. Alice's hand tightened slightly on the wheel, but she didn't look at me. She was giving me the space to do this on my own, and that mattered more than I could explain. Jason's voice dropped. You've been acting weird for weeks. I've been trying to create space. From what? From this. The word came out steadier than I felt. The car was very quiet. Then he said slower now. Is there someone else? I looked out the window at the bright, washed clean world sliding past. I thought about lying. About softening it. About giving him a version he could live with. And for the first time I didn't. There's me, I said quietly. That should have been enough for you to hear the first time I said no. The silence that followed felt almost physical. When he spoke again, his voice was tight and unfamiliar. So that's it? It should have been it a long time ago. I ended the call before he could answer. My hand shook once afterward. Only once. I put the phone down in my lap and stared straight ahead. Alice said nothing for a few seconds. Then very gently, how do you feel? I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Like I've been underwater for months and just came up. Her eyes flicked to mine for half a second, full of something warm and almost proud. Good. The quiet that followed was different. Cleaner. Not because everything was solved. It wasn't. Jason would still be angry. He would probably still try. People like him rarely hear truth as an ending the first time. But I'd heard myself. That mattered. Madison was less avoidable than Jason. She was waiting outside Alice's apartment when we pulled in. She leaned away from the building the second she saw Alice's car, arms crossed, dark sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She was beautiful in the polished, controlled kind of way that made me instantly understand part of why Alice had once chosen her. And instantly understand why this was going to be ugly. Alice parked but didn't turn off the car right away. Stay here if you want, she said quietly. I looked at her. You think I'm hiding the car? A faint, exhausted smile touched her mouth. No. I think you shouldn't have to deal with my past before coffee. I should have laughed. I almost did. But my chest had gone too tight for that. I'm not hiding, I said. Alice nodded once. We got out together. Madison's gaze found me immediately. Took me in. Measured me. Understood far too much far too quickly. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. So that's why you vanished? Alice's jaw tightened. Madison, don't. She cut her off with a sharp little laugh. I called you last night. I know. And you couldn't answer? Alice held the car door between them for a second, like she was deciding whether distance could still help. This isn't the place. Madison looked at me again. No. It's pretty clear what the place is. The words were aimed at both of us, but the sting hit somewhere private anyway. Not because she was right to say it. Because she was looking at something fragile before it had even had a chance to become itself. Alice stepped forward slightly. It ended, Madison. Madison's face changed at that. The practice control cracked just a little, enough to show the anger underneath. For you maybe, for both of us, Alice said. Her voice stayed level, but I could hear the effort in it. Madison's gaze snapped back to me. She told you that? I didn't answer. I didn't know her anything. The silence must have told her enough. She laughed once, humorless. Wow. Alice took another step forward. Leave her out of this. Something in my chest tightened at that. Not because I needed protecting. Because of the way she said it. Immediate. Certain. Madison saw it too. For one stretched second, all 3 of us stood there in the too bright noon light, with everything exposed. Then Madison's expression shut down completely. "You know what?" she said. "Fine." She put her sunglasses back on, as if she couldn't bear to let us see anything else. "But don't pretend this doesn't get messy." Then she walked away. Just like that. No screaming. No scene loud enough for the neighbors. And somehow, that felt worse. I stood very still until she turned the corner. Alice let out a slow breath beside me. "I'm sorry." I looked at her. "For what? For this? For all of it coming at once?" I should have said it was okay. That we'd handle it. That it didn't matter. Instead, I said the truest thing I had. "It matters." She nodded once because she knew I was right. Then I added, softer, "But that doesn't mean I'm sorry." That made something in her eyes shift. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. She looked like she wanted to touch me, and stopped herself because we were still standing in public, still in daylight, still in the aftermath of too many things all at once. "We should go see Emma," she said. "Yeah." Emma opened the door before we knocked. She looked from me to Alice, and then back again, and for half a second none of us spoke. Her apartment smelled like coffee and citrus cleaner, and the candle she always forgot to blow out after working late. Then Emma leaned against the doorframe and folded her arms. There was the tiniest smile at the corner of her mouth. "I warned you." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Not because it was funny exactly. Because it was so precisely Emma. So absurdly gentle in the middle of something that had felt huge all morning that my body didn't know what else to do. Alice groaned softly. "Oh my God." Emma stepped aside and let us in. "I'm serious," she said, shutting the door behind us. I literally said, "Don't fall for her." "You said it as a joke," I said. Emma lifted one eyebrow. "Did I?" I stared at her. And then I understood. Not all at once. Just enough. "You knew," I said quietly. Emma shrugged and walked toward the kitchen. "Knew is a strong word, Emma." She turned and looked at me properly then, her expression softening. "I saw the way you looked at each other before either of you did," she said. "I just didn't think a concert and a tropical storm would accelerate the process." Alice made a strangled sound somewhere between embarrassment and disbelief. I sat down at Emma's kitchen table because my legs suddenly didn't feel completely reliable. Emma poured coffee into 3 mugs like we were discussing traffic, not the fact that I'd crossed a line I could never uncross with her best friend. "You're not mad?" I asked. Emma set a mug in front of me. "Should I be?" "I don't know." She leaned one hip against the counter. "Are you happy?" The question landed more deeply than all the others had. Not "Are you scared?" Not "Are you sure?" Not what happens now. Just that. "Are you happy?" I looked down at the coffee for a second, at the steam rising from it in delicate threads. Then I looked up at Alice, who was standing a few feet away with her hands around her own mug, watching me in that quiet way she always did when something mattered. My answer came before I could edit it. "Yes." Emma smiled then. Small. Real. Then "I'm not mad." The room went quiet around us. Not empty. Full. Alice exhaled softly, like she'd been holding her breath since the motel. Emma glanced between us. "That said," she added, because of course she had to add something, "if either of you breaks the other's heart, I reserve the right to become incredibly annoying." That made Alice laugh first. Then me. And just like that, the shape of the day changed again. Not simpler. Not easier. But steadier. We stayed there longer than I expected. Long enough for the adrenaline to fade. Long enough for Emma to make another pot of coffee and ask practical questions in her usual way. About the motel, the storm, whether the car had flooded, whether I'd finally told Jason to back off. When I told her I had, something proud flickered across her face so quickly I almost missed it. By late afternoon, the light in her apartment had turned honey soft. Everything looked gentler in it. Alice and I left together. Outside, the air smelled like damp pavement warming under the sun. We stood beside her car for a second, without speaking. No storm now. No motel. No darkness to blur the edges of things. Just daylight and consequence and the quiet continuation of whatever this was becoming. Alice looked at me. "So, she said softly. So, I echoed. She smiled just a little. This is usually where people ask what happens now. Do you want me to? No. That surprised me. Then she added, I think I want to find out instead. Something in my chest shifted at that. Because it wasn't a promise. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't the false comfort of trying to force certainty onto something that had barely begun. It was more honest than that. I stepped a little closer. Not enough to touch. Just enough that the air between us felt shared. Good, I said quietly. Me too. She looked at me for a long second, sunlight catching in her hair, the whole day lingering between us like heat rising off the pavement after rain. Too close, I thought. But now the phrase carried no panic at all. Only recognition. Only acceptance. Only the quiet truth that some distances were never meant to stay intact. A storm had trapped us in one room, one bed, one impossible night. But what changed me wasn't the weather. It was the moment I stopped mistaking fear for a reason to turn away. Some storms leave the sky cleaner than they found it. And standing there beside Alice in the late Florida light, I had to ask myself, when did wanting something stop feeling like danger and start feeling like becoming? If this story found something true in you, thank you for staying with me through it. And if you believe some nights change more than the weather, stay a little longer, leave your heart in the comments, and come back for the next story.